Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sweetspot Safari again. This is your hosts, John and Ben, and we're going to be having an informal discussion, as we do, on a slightly different topic today. And this is going to be about style and substance, which is a bit different to what we've done before. So the first question is, why did we choose this? And I think one of the reasons, and we've discussed this, is that we feel that there are certain circumstances where it's out of balance. We think about the concept of the sweet spot. We're trying to find the sweet spot. And we're going to explore that a bit today. So why is it out today, really? Why is it out of balance? I think it's because some people, and this is traditional, and we're going to go through some of the history, are being motivated by style. Some have been motivated by substance. And I think the point we're going to try and hopefully get across today is that they're not mutually exclusive. There are things that can be complementary, which is arguably the balance point. Some people, look at style and substance. I mean, that's the definition we've chosen today. They could talk about function and form, and we're going to explore that, in various different guises today, from a product size and an object side, also from a human size and a philosophy side. So hopefully this is going to be interest to you. So let's go into a bit more detail now. So what do we actually mean by them, Ben?
I think they probably mean different things to different people. And they certainly did when we first talked about this as an idea, but perhaps we might start with substance. And one frame might be, think of it as something real or objective. It can be in a physical material, a chemical, or perhaps a drug when we think about substance abuse. It also refers to a quality that perhaps is important, but also has practical value. And it also points towards an essential part of an idea, or perhaps what you're going to be talking a little bit about today, what's being said. And there's also an element of, again, connecting to what you're going to be alluding to. It's perhaps the perspective of the human character. It's maybe the hidden bit that actually gives substance to who we are and how we act. And then from a style perspective, we might think of words such as flair and objective, or subjective, sorry. We might think of someone who's fashionable as somebody having style. And it's also a quality and perhaps a way of expressing, saying, doing, or executing something. So we might think of style as perhaps evoking feelings and emotions in us. So that's probably just like a headline view of style and substance. What's your take on it?
Oh yeah, thanks, Ben. That's a good lean in, and a just slightly different perspective here. And just building on what you were saying is, particularly around the character side and also the physical side, is that one way to look at it is it could be the difference between perception and reality. But if you actually take those in combination, they sort of define both the what and the how. And certainly for me, having been in consulting for a lot of my time, the three key questions were always why. Okay, why are you doing it? We're not going to explore that today, but very much what and the how. The what is, what it's going to be, and the how is going to, how you're going to deliver it. We'll leave the when for the moment. That's very much about timing, etc. And that sort of touches a bit on my engineering background to a certain extent. It's like when you design stuff. I mean, I started in my early years in the chemical industry designing chemical plants, different sizes and shapes. Now, the interesting thing there, of course, is when you look at a chemical plant, is the customer never sees the end product, right? Well, they will see the end product, sorry, they'll see the end product, but they don't see how it's made. So if you take an oil refinery, for instance, or a chemical plant, you will see lots of pipes and distillation columns and reactors and stuff on the outside. But the product that ultimately the people will buy will be, first of all, a liquid, and then it will be processed either into a plastic product or something else. So people don't have any views of that. So when you're building a chemical plant, and that's my early years, actually, form or what it looked like didn't matter. It was all about function. It was all about what's it going to deliver? What's the performance of that distillation column? Is it going to separate the products and stuff? And that was very, very much my early years. And it was interesting how my career developed, because having moved away from petrochemicals, I moved into automotive sector. and automotive paints, where we made paints for cars, some of them sports cars as well. And that was quite interesting because that was the overlap for me, function and form, because we had to make high performance paints, in a chemical plant that would go on car body shells and bumpers and things like that. But it had to look right. It was really important. People's not going to buy a new car if there are bubbles in their paint, or what we used to have in those days we called orange painting. It was really, really important that we focused on the imagery, right? And if you go into what they call the refinish car paint industry, which is very much the sports cars and Formula One and things like that, image was absolutely critical. You think about the launch of a new car in those days, with lots of glitz and glamour and everything else. So again, that's just to give you an idea, and we're going to go into more depth on that, functional forms. I think the things also is that some people as well, and these are the extremes, because remember, we're trying to find balance in the sweet spot here, is some people are either intoxicated by one or another. If you look at it, for instance, an architect, right, they are quite often motivated by the external look of the building, which is the form, right, how it looks on the inside, what people's initial impression is as they go into reception, the atrium. Whereas the engineers are very much interested in, is the building going to be functional? Is it going to work? Is there enough space? Is there enough space to be able to maintain things, for instance, or get access to go and put in HV plant, etc. So they're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. But that's and building's a great example where function and form have to come together, and that's become really important these days, more so than ever before. And again, so we think that this is quite an important topic. Not as serious as some of the other topics we've covered, but that's part of our journey. We're trying to get people to look at all sorts of things in different ways. So, Ben, I know you've got some personal experiences and you've got some great passion. So, lead us into some of that.
Yeah, well, I think you just touched on one theme which is being close to my heart, which is the house build. So I, as you know, I moved into a house which I built last year. And so it was a long process, but actually it was a really interesting process of sitting down, initially with an architect. And then there's just obviously all of these different stages where you're speaking to engineers and builders, and the kind of finished product, as you say, is what you capture in the photo. And it's in the kind of drawings initially, which really captures your imagination. But it's interesting being on site and actually seeing all of the inner workings, the actual kind of substance, the footings, the structure, which you don't necessarily see when you move into a house, how it got erected and what loads each floor can take and wall can take. And it was just really interesting just seeing the different stages. And for me, a house which looks nice is important, but first and foremost, a house which remains intact after a few years is probably more important. So that was just an interesting thing, which you got me thinking when you were talking there.
Okay.
But then thinking kind of back to my childhood, and probably come up in a few of these conversations. Michael Schumacher was interestingly my kind of hero, my sporting hero. And I know here in the UK he causes a bit of friction with what he did to Damon Hill, but I love the kind of fusion of kind of German kind of substance, if you like, this kind of not ruthless, but competitive performer with Italian flair.
Excellence, basically, from an engineering point of view and from a human point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of man and machine, but also kind of German and Italy. For me, there was just something about these kind of complementary things coming together, almost in like this kind of perfect form, where Ferrari dominated and Schumacher dominated in the early 2000s. And so that was like, looking back on it, that my appreciation of both, a kind of useful driver, but also the flair of the Italian team coming together. And I think that, my recent work, looking at how design influences how people interact in classrooms, in workplace, because design touches everything. So I think of design really as a combination or bridge between art and science. And it needs to be about the what and the how, which you alluded to in your scene setting piece as well. So yeah, I don't know if you got any thoughts on that.
No, I think, and I know you're a deep lover of motorsport like me, but music, and we're going to talk on the cognitive side of it. You've touched that on already, and particularly how design touches everything in the classroom, which I think is really from an educational point of view, because that's one of the aha moments we've had in our discussions, isn't it? It's not just about designers. Everything is designed in some way or form, whether it be, physical or even subliminal. But I know, Ben, you've got some thoughts on the evolution and the human lens as well, which I think are quite interesting. So maybe you could share that with us too.
Yeah, and so a lot of my thinking really, why do we do what we do today? Why do we appreciate what we do today? Why are we different? In what ways are we different? And I quite often just go back to where we came from and how we evolved. And I see humans as having two survival needs. We need to both eat and also not be eaten. And I think when we're in this kind of eating mode, you might think of we're looking for utility or usefulness in our environment, either to eat or perhaps make tools. You could think of maybe language as a kind of form of substance. It's a tool which we use to manipulate on one perspective, but maybe kind of persuade and influence in another way. But then that kind of not when we're not seeking prey, we're doing other things, and maybe we care more about thinking back to like cave drawings or making kind of early jewelry, tens of thousands of years ago. We started paying attention to self-expression. And creating art, and so I think of maybe we care about both what's useful but also beauty as well. And beauty can be many things. It can be art, it can be music, it could be poetry, stories, it could be all sorts of different things. So I like to see or think about humans as having these two different modes, and I think they lend itself to form and function, or maybe style and substance.
No, I mean, that's absolutely great. It's funny, you got me thinking because of your sporting analogy. I mean, we're lucky to have common interest. One is motorsport, and I participate, and the other one is football. In your previous conversations that we've had, you talked about you're following England, in France and the World Cup and everything else. And I got thinking about football a bit today, because I have to admit my partisanship for a certain football club right, in the north of England. And I was thinking about function and form as well. The aim of a footballer is to score as many goals as they possibly can. But people also talk about style in football as well, don't they? They talk about the beautiful game, the way that the way the ball can drift in flight and bend and everything else. So there is something quite beautiful, if you're a football fan, as well as the importance of scoring goals. So that's another example of where sort of function and form sort of come together in a sporting context as well.
Yeah.
I know something, again, we talked a bit about, and going back to the evolution in the history, you look at the Greek philosophers, that was probably the early stages of when function and form started to come together. People started to look at things. People started to look not just at the written words for the content and what it meant in its meaning, but also the aesthetic as well with painting. So, this has been going on for a number of years. I don't want to talk too much about product design and now, because again, we've touched on that already, but some people say that things like Apple, for instance, sports cars, the ideas, you've got the function, of an Apple computer, which is, high performing, but also it always looks very, very sleek as well. But there are plenty of other examples. What I'd like to do is take us on a slightly different path here and think about the substance of the individual. And I know you've touched on it already. You talked about character, Ben, I think that, that's really, really important, because, the substance can be allied to things like character, thinking, approach, mindset, something that's very dear to my heart now as a coach. People's mindset, is it a positive mindset? Is it a constructive mindset? Is it going to edify? Is it going to help? And I got thinking more about that recently, because there's a lot of, to a certain extent over the world, not just in the UK, a lot of press around politicians and their response to the COVID pandemic and how they've dealt with situations. Arguably, some of them have been found out to be hypocritical. I'm not going to mention names. And arguably without substance, and trying to desperately sort of rectify their careers, improve their image, their style, and everything else. But are they doing it? Are they doing it really for the greater good? I'm not here to judge them. I'm just posing the question: or are they doing it for themselves? And again, one of the things that drives character is ego. I'm not going to talk about ego today. There's lots of debate about ego at the moment. So we have to think about it. It's not just politicians. We have to think about superficiality. I know that's something we've talked on as well, Ben, isn't it? You could say that if people are superficial, they lack substance. In my life, if I look at some of the people I've worked alongside, I've worked alongside great people, in the consulting world, some absolutely brilliant people, genuine people. But I've also worked alongside and worked for some people who you really wouldn't want to work for, and who lacked substance. And the problem with that, of course, is that when you've got somebody who lacks substance as a leader in any context, is that they're not just damaging themselves and the wider world, they're damaging their teams as well, right? Because people see that they've not got substance. So I think the point I'm trying to get across here is, yes, we look at physical products, but we also need to look at our minds as well. We need to look at some of the soft things as well. So yeah, that's just really a sort of bit of extra context. So Ben, I know, something we've touched on before is, and particularly in this context, it'd be very powerful to share your thoughts around, excess or the absence, the extremes again of style and substance. I mean, extreme sounds a very strong word, maybe polarity, maybe differences or something like that. You've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think basically the kind of the world and the idea about these different themes is we're trying to introduce that opposites and polarities exist, but they're on the continuous spectrum. And I think it's important to recognize that, one can be, quite often a mirror, a reflection of the other. And actually they're both connected. But I think, sometimes a kind of useful frame to think about, when they become problematic is to either think of them through an excessive lens or when they're kind of, absent. And so maybe if I think of, an absence of style, I might think of, somebody perhaps being cold or maybe, lacking inspiration. And, we're not just thinking creatures, we're kind of feeling emotional creatures. And so actually emotion, helps us, be motivated and to do things and to achieve things. But, on the flip side, I think an absence of substance, we might think of it as, maybe we might describe it as hollow or meaningless. Perhaps we're lacking context, or going back to my kind of experience of building a house, having no solid foundations for the house to be built on. And I kind of just wonder, actually, just going back to what you were just saying about superficiality, and the opposite there being kind of depth, perhaps. So something about kind of like shallow and deep. And I just wonder actually whether there's a kind of 2x2 matrix here with style and substance, but also shallow and deep. And can you can have like shallow and deep substance. So you can have like real meaningful substance. And I also think you can have like a deeper kind of style. So I think you can have, I'm trying to think of maybe a kind of good example, but you might just have like a kind of superficial, veneer of style. So you might just have like maybe just like a kind of really nice screen on your computer, but actually just everything else about it might be, lacking in style. So I think there's something there. And I think that, you think of the phrase, style over substance, which a lot of people have used in their lifetime, which is a logical fallacy. And I think it's to your point is that maybe particularly in politics, we use kind of compelling tools and artistry or clever use of language to kind of give the impression of substance when actually there's nothing really there.
Yeah, I really like to come in on that one,
Yeah.
Ben. So you're absolutely right. And just before I do that, I want to go back to your 2x2 actually, because that's
Yeah.
really, really powerful. Not just because I'm a consultant, we love 2x2s actually, is that if you remember, one of the conversations and one of the potential topics we talked about was depth versus shallowness, right?
Mm.
And we were trying to get our heads around, how we'd get that across, meaningfully. And I think you've possibly found a bit of an answer there, is that actually in the 2x2, the deep style and shallow style, for instance, and deep substance and shallow substance, right? Actually, they do go together. I think maybe there's an answer there,
Mm.
in the 2x2. I think that certainly helps me think about it a lot. And I think I'd like to come back to your point about the politicians and the use of language in the world to almost create an illusion, I think, of substance. That's what you were trying to sort of imply. And I think there's definitely that going on all over the world, and it doesn't matter which country you're in or political denomination. But it's also, something we were touching on earlier, or previously, Ben, is this is where maybe there is a problem with social media and what I would call either the like, share, or the soundbite culture. People are being funneled, I think, is the expression I'd use, to use social media for dialogue and conversations. But it's all very short. It doesn't matter whether it's a YouTube video or a TikTok video or Instagram or whatever, or Twitter, where, as you say, it's limited to a number of characters and stuff. It's the people trying to pack for want of a better word, their own punch into a short, message. And that in itself can be self-defeating. So, we can't have the same level of, you have to look at some of the dialogues on Twitter, which personally I avoid, because it feels as though it's an absolutely toxic space. And maybe those places are more toxic because people don't get the full context. We've talked before, haven't we, about perspective and nuance and context and the importance of that. And you just see everything crammed into a space, and it doesn't allow people to have proper debate. One of the things we've touched on before is the importance of debate and critical thinking and analysis. And maybe, and to your point about design and everything being designed, things are being predetermined by the platforms, right? And the media that we use, effectively preventing us by funneling us into this short form, from having proper analysis, proper debate, real discussions. And in fact, I saw an interesting article this week in a magazine, whereby an editor was explaining that unfortunately he'd lost his job over a tweet that he'd deleted, right? And his intent was not to cause harm or offense. It was he wanted to have an impact, and he fell into the trap that that people would understand the context and the nuance, and people didn't. He deleted it. Unfortunately, it was deemed unacceptable, right? And in fairness to him, he's taken it on the chin, but he was writing an article afterwards saying that how this nuance and the perspective is being lost because everything is being crammed into such a short space. And I think, if we're trying to find balance and sweet spots, I think there's a huge danger. If you look at a spectrum or a rainbow, something we've talked about, it's very difficult to get a good idea when you just look at bits of it, right? Chunks of it or small chunks of it, rather than the full picture, if that makes sense, Ben.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
lead into what you were going to think about finding sweet spots and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and maybe that kind of rainbow piece is connected to the analogy of the elephant and the six blind men, that we're all kind of trying to grapple with this tiny little piece of what's going on, but actually we need to kind of put it together to see the whole, to actually understand it. So I don't know if there was a connection there, but I think this is why I gravitate, just before I go on to thinking about the sweet spots, why I quite like long form podcasts, because actually I think podcasts, if allowing for a significant period of time and longer than this, I quite often just listen to maybe 2-3 hour podcasts where it's a conversation on either a bunch of connected subjects or perhaps just one subject if it's meaningful. And I think it just allows a nice combination of both style and substance for people to explore subjects. And I think just in this world which we live in, where it's just infinite amount of information, actually we kind of, it encourages, like the social media platforms, to basically engage with information and knowledge just at a really superficial layer. And you could argue that actually it's superficial, both substance as well as style. So I think there are, in some ways there are problems with digital technology, but there's also solutions there. And I also mentioned the what I quite like, the idea of slow media to you this week. So the magazine called Delayed Gratification, and I think that maybe that again kind of builds into, actually there's a way to bring both style and substance to the way that we consume media.
Yeah, I love that. I did actually look at some of the articles in that magazine. I'd not come across it before, but you think about the metaphor, delayed gratification. It's almost a perfect analogy, isn't it? About just let's take a pause, let's sit back, let's think, right? Let's get all the information, get the full spectrum, right? And not worry about the instant gratification. And with that, you'll get both style and substance, you've got all the information there. But that in itself has its own style. So there is this interconnect.
Exactly.
I think that's really, really powerful and stuff. So I think we're getting close to wrapping up a bit now, Ben. But that's been great. I know you've got an expression around this, and I've got one too. So I'll let you come in with yours first, because let's leave it on a quote.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, just to wrap up the design piece, and I think that really, design does touch everything. So everything that we, from where we, how we kind of create our, living space, to what technologies we choose to use, whether we're indoors or outdoors. I think that design is both what something does, but how it does it. And I think we should definitely pay more attention to, just everything that we kind of choose has some effects, not just on our environment, but when we design our environment designs us. And there's this kind of reciprocal loop there. And so, we kind of design tools, and our tools, design us, and they kind of shape how we kind of interact with both the tools, but also with each other. And I think that design is just a kind of way of really kind of solving a lot of our problems, and basically designing ourselves as well. And I think just to round out the kind of piece about communication, John, if you don't mind as well, I think that we quite often get stuck either in just talking about stories and having narratives without data, or we get maybe stuck with just talking about facts and figures without actually have a compelling story. And I think that communication in all its forms is really about bringing both data and stories together. And I think that makes it compelling. But yeah, just to finish on a quote, and it's from an unnamed person, but it goes, "If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit." And I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a similar quote, which I'll come back on in a minute. But yeah, rounding out, as you say, I think there's the thing, as you say, of mind over matter, because, it's almost lead lag, isn't it? The mind designs things, but also the matter can actually, shape your thinking. So I think that's important. So just, reflecting a bit on what you're saying about design and shaping, I think you make a good point about the importance of design. But, I always, go up into the helicopter, as right? When I look down as well as at the detail, I think that it's about having good design versus bad design, because there's good design and bad design. And good design is the one that's got both form and function, style and substance, because that relies on a level of thought and diligence. And sitting above that, at the top of the mountain, the pyramid, what I would say, is values and principles. Because our values and principles drive everything. Our values and principles would enable us to go and have a good design, which again, arguably, if you think about it, good design is the sweet spot, isn't it? If you look at everything, it is in itself a sweet spot. So not to be outdone on the quote front, my father used to have a thing he called B cubed, which was called bullshit baffles brains, which is actually quite similar to your quote as well.
Yeah, I like it.
So that's great. So I hope everybody's enjoyed this. Look out for our next topic in the series, and yes, so yeah, follow us on the YouTube channel, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Cheers, John. Take care, folks.